welcome everybody. I'm delighted to see lots of people here, and I'm ashamed of the people that aren't here and didn't turn up in person. I am very, very happy to introduce you, and I hope this will be the first of several interactions between the math department and Quatuor Diotima, which I think we have due today, but there's more anyway. Who are artists in residence at the UChicago for some time, including going into the fall. Today, the two that we have are Léo Marivier, if I have that right, and Pierre Mollet. Sorry for the pronunciation. So they sort of formed in 1996 by graduates of the Paris National Conservatoire, and I guess also maybe Lyon. And the name, so Diotima, apparently, I think it's sort of, she occurs maybe for the first time as a character in Plato's Symposium. The name means honored by the gods. But then she made a reappearance as a character in some poetry and novels of Oderlin, where she sort of was a stand-in for his object of love, Suzette Gontard, the wife of his employer. Then Diotima, I guess, was used in a piece of music in the 20th century by Luigi Nono, his fragment Stila for Diotima. And I guess that's sort of more proximally where the name comes from. The quartet have been champions of new music. They played many pieces that have been composed for them by contemporary composers, including, I guess, they worked with Pierre Boulez, Helmut Lachenmann, and they had a piece that was composed for them by Alberto Posada called Liturgia Fractal, which one quotes has some mathematics in it and connections to mathematics. I believe we hope that they will play some of that in the fall in a more substantial kind of concert sort of setting. But for today, we are absolutely delighted. They're going to give us a discussion, a lecture about mathematics and music and the connections, which will be followed by a kind of a Q&A here, and then a reception in the barn. And we hope that you will sort of take the opportunity to introduce yourselves to the musicians, because they're really hoping we're going to have some sort of relationship kind of going forward, and there'll be a real exchange of ideas and conversations between sort of two groups of people who are not far apart on the campus, but maybe don't interact as much as they should. So I'll just turn it over to you guys.
Thanks, Daniel, for the introduction. So we are two members of the team. You know that two is not four. Sure. So first thing, we are musicians, not mathematicians. So do not expect from us, Leo and me, to explain something about mathematics. I should have come with my father. He's a mathematician, but not me. I decided something else. So, but it doesn't mean that we are not interested to mathematics, and also because we are musicians. We often say that music and mathematics are related. We will, during this little conference, see through the story of music how it is related or not related as well. Because sometimes it's not so easy to find the links, or it's easy to find the links, but maybe it's also not so easy to understand that the link is just the link and it's not exactly music. So we will also explore in the third part of the conference, also with the Q&A, how it is different, how it is linked, and what it means also for us as a musician, because our main thing we spoke with Augusta yesterday about this is to be on stage and not only to sing or to understand the pieces, to understand this, but also to play it. And we'll speak about this back and forth between reflection or thinking about the music and also being on stage. So I will just read something about Leibniz. I find it, sorry, my eyes are really. So the German thinker, mathematician, philosopher, a lot of things at this period, who once, I think in 1712, as far as I know, wrote this. Music is a hidden exercise in arithmetic, such that the mind ignores that it counts. Ignorance arises from the fact that there is something in confused or non-sensory perceptions that cannot be distinctly grasped. It is wrong to pretend that there is nothing in the soul which the conscious doesn't know. The soul, even when it does not feel that it matters, nevertheless experiences the result of its secret calculation. Whether it delights in consonances or suffers the wound of dissonances which it feels results from the numerical ratios, which means that there is, even for him, it means that music can be helped by mathematics, but probably is not totally mathematics, but we will go through the story to this conclusion, try at least. So maybe Leo can introduce.
Leibniz, in the quote, he talks about music and he talks about sound. And so music as a physical phenomenon is basically in terms of frequency, it's on a logarithmic scale. And that it's just in front of a kind of the origin and the source of music, which is the vibrating wire. So if you take a wire and I can just do it with my violin. And if you pull it at a certain tension, and if you pull it at a certain tension, it gives you a frequency. But then if you keep that tension and you just press with your fingers in the middle of it, you have what we call the octave. That's twice the frequency. If you put a quarter of it, you get 4 times. That's what we call the fifth. That ratio, the fifth, or 3:2, that's the fraction we describe it with. It was the basis for Pythagoras and the very beginning of the theorization of music. So that's the 4 vibrating wires in a wooden box. So that's and if it's that's the octave. That's 4 times, 8 times, etc. And the entire history of music has been about going up the scale and discovering and integrating it into the discourse. At the time of Leibniz, what he calls dissonance is fairly traditional for us today, but this ratio of 3:2 causes some kind of a big problem. I don't know if you know about this, but there is a wolf in mathematics and music. It's basically there are 12 what we call chromatic tones that you can build in 2 ways. You have the classical way of adding fifths, so adding 3:2, and then 3:2 to that frequency, and then you go. But when you come back to the original tone, it's not the same. And it's kind of a shame because the Greeks were looking for beauty. And even, for example, if you want to make what we call a major third out of these fifths, you get doesn't sound very homogeneous in a way. And that at the time of the Greeks didn't appear because their instruments had a very small range. It got about to about the octave. It's the lyre, the classical Greek instrument, has only 7 strings, and so it's divided into 2 tetrachords. So with the fifth and the fourth, and so it makes the octave. We'll talk about numbers after, but numbers and math and math in music are kind of trickily linked. But at around the time of Bach, the instruments got bigger, and so people started to realize that these so-called good intervals didn't sound good using that method of intonation. And so that was when appeared the equal temperament. So instead of adding fifth by fifth, you just take an octave and divide it by whatever you want. So it's the 12th root of 2. That's what you get when you want to get a mean tone or equal temperament. Sorry, the nomenclature is deceivingly obscure. You get what we call halftones. So none of the intervals are perfect, but all of them just kind of add up to being in correct harmony. And that's what Bach wanted to prove when he wrote the Well-Tempered Clavier. Because very recently, very recently in the 1720s, we talked to these guys a lot. He wanted to prove that this tuning could fit into all keys. And that's kind of the first big part of what to work with in terms of sound. In terms of expression, it comes a bit later.
Which means also that during centuries, music was a science, not something else, not art. Which is a huge difference. And we will see that when it became separate later.
But music theory and even written music, which started about the 9th century in Europe, and at the birth of the universities in Bologna and in Paris in the late 12th, early 13th century, music was part of what we call the quadrivium. So the quadrivium are the 4 classical fields of study in university. So there's arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. And it is only considered as either a science or something in the service of writing mass, writing music for mass, for the verses of a psalm or stuff like that. And then the building built up even after Bach, and people trying to find structures around this, because when you have this equal temperament, you have intervals that are more tense than others.
Yeah, which also means that what is music exactly? It's about the pitch. It's about also the rhythm, which means sometimes the proportions,
duration,
and also about the sound, and then the resonance and what it means physically to listen to something.
Yeah.
So that's all of the, and also the timbre as well.
Yeah. So timbre is going to be important later. So the way you can distinguish the sound of a flute compared to the sound of a clarinet or a violin or any instrument is the spectrum of the instrument. It's what we call the timbre. So it's depending on the way the instrument is made, certain harmonics of a given pitch will resonate and will indicate a certain type of sound. For example, I won't give an example because I'm not sure about that, but string instruments have a much wider range of playing around with the harmonic spectrum of a certain pitch, as we will see. So Bach in the 18th century was also interested in finding forms that would fit this new system of what came to be called tonality. So with polarities between 2 opposing but neighbor fifths. For example, if you have a piece in D minor or D major, the opposite side, the opposite side, I would say, would be A. That's the sort of counter argument. That's the antithesis of the note that you want to improve and serve and use.
So later on, well, I don't know if you have knowledge about music. We don't know who you are. I know some of you, but not everybody. So when Leo is speaking about Johann Sebastian Bach, it means until the middle of the 18th century. And so later on, the music changed radically also because the philosophy changed, the society changed a lot. We got the French Revolution, not only. In music, it changed a lot. It's also at this moment when string quartet started to develop, was invented by Joseph Haydn, and later on Mozart and then Beethoven. And so a lot of things changed about music. Leo was referring about the shape, the structure of pieces. We know that that's the moment where the sonata form started to be developed, especially with the string quartet. It's totally related. It's not about mathematics, but it means that then we have something else to do music, which is much more important.
It's not mathematics, it's their formulas.
Yeah, exactly. It's about getting a first idea, a second idea, trying to develop this. You have to develop, you have the development of these two ideas, and then a summary conclusion. So, and it's exactly what we are doing when at school we have to, yeah, that's rhetoric, exactly, that's exactly the same. So it means that it's not related to mathematics. And that's the reason why, for example, in the 19th century, there is nothing about mathematics at all.
Because it was about
the self. Exactly, it was about the self. It was about the emotions, the romanticism, as we say. And then music changed totally. And for at least 100 years, it was like that. And then happened, well, arrived the 20th century. And then all of the tonal system, maybe the sonata form as well, maybe we speak about this, and all of the structures that was important for music just fade a little bit. And all of the composers wanted to renew all of this. And then arrived Arnold Schoenberg, Anton Webern, Alban Berg, so all of the second pianist school, and then later on, Janacek, Bartók, and the French Ravel and Debussy. So all of them, if you look at what they tried to invent to renew the language of music, they got different ways, different paths to reach the point they wanted to. So maybe we will concentrate on only some composers, maybe Bartók,
yes,
Alban Berg, these two examples, which are not the same. Yeah, just at the beginning, and then after later on we will speak about the second half of the 20th century. So maybe we will start with Bartók. Do you know who is Bartók? I don't ask Krista, I'm sure she knows it. So he was an Hungarian composer, also a pianist. He was an incredible pianist, really an incredible pianist, but he was also an incredible composer. He was fascinated by shapes a lot. Seashells. He was really fascinated by seashells and how it is structured. So then he decided also to be, well, not close, but to know about mathematics. even if it didn't confirm totally, but we know that the golden section, and then it means also the Fibonacci series was really important. I will show you. So, sorry, that's the first time I'm in front of an audience, not to play, but just to speak. It's quite difficult to sometimes do it. So you will get this. Thanks. So, and later on this. We did not know how many people were going to come, so Daniel was not really able to. Sorry for that. So what you get is the score of the music for percussion, piano, and celesta from Bartok, which is a piece probably you know. I'm sure that you heard something, but later you will know why. So in this piece, he is using the Fibonacci series. So I don't want to say the golden section, but something close to this. So you know what is the Fibonacci series, probably all of you. Not, I'll tell you. What is interesting in this piece, in the score you have here, is when he's going to, if you look at the bar numbers, what is going on the bar 1, bar 2, bar 3, 5, 8, etc. All of the Fibonacci series. Each time something happens. So, of course, on bar 1, there is the entry of the violin. And then, as the theme, the motif is in 2 parts, on bar 2, there is again, after a short silence, the second entry. So it means 1, 2 in the Fibonacci series. Maybe I will write. I get the impression to be a teacher. Which is really literally, sorry. No, don't laugh. Okay. So on bar 2, there is also something. Also on bar 3. And then on bar 5, you have the other violin section, which is entry. So on bar 8, yeah, exactly. On bar 8, you have also the cello who are entering. So later on bar 30, there are other violin who are viola who are entering, and so on for all of the piece. Sorry.
Yes, I have a question. There's no idea voices.
Sorry.
That's why.
Sorry. Sorry, I'm not a teacher, definitely. So on bar 13, so you have the violin 2. On bar 18, you have the double bass, and on bar 27, you have the first violin. Also, sometimes you can see that on the score that there is only the entry, but there is also when it is coming to end the phrase. For example, 21. Marks the end of the enunciation of the theme of the double basses and begin a short episode before the entry of the first violin bar 27. Which means that for each figure of the Fibonacci series is doing something. And so it means that maybe you will hear it or not really, but it helps him to structure the time. And that's something very important that for the conclusion we want to have today, it's also that to tell you that it's not something magical. Something about using the process, something that helps, and then putting it with his own words, so which means pitches, rhythm, etc., inside a form, and not something else. It's not something that will reveal and help him to. Well, it's not about. It's the Fibonacci series is not the music. It's just help him to do something, and it's also for him probably a real pleasure to be structured, to have something that not to be free in a way. You know that freedom comes with rules, laws, and etc. The modern society, freedom we can get in our society, and that's the same for the composers. They need this, and it applies for every great composer to be confident with the structure of the books they get before writing in front of the blank page. So that's one thing. I wanted also, I don't know how to do, Daniel, just to send to want to watch just a short extract of a movie. How to do? My computer, sorry.
Bartok had also something of an inquiring role because he actually is credited with the foundation of a science, which is called ethnomusicology. So from about 1898 until the First World War, he would go around Europe and Northern Africa and Middle East to collect melodies. And the metaphor with the seashells is, I think it's very interesting because, so he would collect music from peoples which had never had their music written before. So their music evolved in a natural way, not in a revolutionary way, as is the case often with written music. And so he collected about 10 or 12,000 of these tunes, melodies or rhythms, sometimes, wedding songs and funeral rites, but always with the goal of compiling everything. And he got so much into it that his own creative making, his own creative mind was infused by that spirit of collecting, by that spirit of almost of observing details. Because when someone asks you to repeat something without having it written down, you won't say it the same way. And he realized that. And so this side of the work of isomorphism or the transformation of motifs, he kind of came up with a music that stopped being linear in a way, that stopped following a preset path of sonata form. But for every new material, he would come up with a new form, with a form that would be contiguous and continuous with that material. And the fugue from the music for strings, percussion, etc. is an astonishing example of that search for fluidity. And of course, as a creative musician and composer, this also evoked some things in his own mind in terms of images, because he would, at about the same time as the music for strings, percussion, and celestas, that's 1936, he would come up with a set of pieces that's called Out of Doors. And the third movement of that suite is called Night Music. And so in classical music, you have bar lines. In Bartók, they're just here for the performer. Many bar lines are only here for readability, because his work even with rhythm, you have many times you don't have any preconceived pattern, but willingly he creates something that is both groovy and unpredictable, as is the case with, well, really a lot of his music. But he was really, looking and playing with new ways of presenting material, presenting it, and constantly varying it.
So this paper is about the structure of the first movement of the music for percussion, celestin, from Bartók. And you can look at it, and it's not only about the entry and of the instruments, it's also about the dynamic. For example, there is the climax at about 55, which is the series, as far as I understand, and also the number of bars, which is 89. Well, actually 88, and that's something we will speak later on. It's not exactly 89, but it's 88. So it means that for everything, also for the mute, also the structure inside, because here it's really easy because you have 1 beat, 2 beats, etc. But then when it comes to 13 beats, 21, 34, it's too long for a composer then to structure it. Then he decided to structure it inside this, and then to have sometimes exactly to structure, for example, if you this one, so which means 13. So to structure it with what is before, with the figures before. Is the mute off, the mute on, the entry of someone, etc. But all of this. So it means that when writing music in front of a composer, I mean, it's not about listening to something, well, hearing something. It's also about hearing something, but also about how to think about the structure and the melody, how to structure the melody. So it means that when you are listening to music, you find it beautiful, you find it incredible, moving, but maybe for the composer, when he was going to write it, it was totally different. I am really speaking about the composer. You can ask her after. So she has plenty of things to speak about this. So it means that for this kind of music, and I maybe don't have time maybe to listen to it. Maybe we will just listen a short extract. But after that, it means that all of this music, even if it's really beautiful, is something really crafted. I mean, it's something incredibly intelligent for that. Now we will listen to if my computer works. I need a password for the Wi-Fi. You have something. So we try just. Sorry.
Do you want it projected to a screen or something?
Well, Maybe not. They all know this movie. I'm sure.
Oh, dear.
No, I'm sure.
I need.
So you have to know. Just to understand what it means also.
And so that's for structure. But Bartók is also a fascinating case in terms of convergent evolution, in terms of thinking about how to structure harmony. So when he was collecting his tunes, he often remarked that around Hungary, there was often a scale that was often used. And instead of the classical minor, so the classical minor divides the octave using the 3:2 ratio, but there is kind of an odd note in the Hungarian version. That's probably the more dissonant interval you can get. He decided to make this note
We can make it an English key.
the new dominant, the new rhetorical tool for structuring music. And you have motifs that are built within that space of an augmented fourth or diminished fifth. So you have symmetry in a scale. It's not symmetry in terms of frequency, but it's a symmetry in terms of number of semitones. So there is kind of a change in thinking at the beginning of the 20th century. You go from ratio to a figure of semitones. Instead of dividing the harmonic space, you add it up to create your scales. So you have also in France, we have what we call the whole tone scale.
I'm not sure what I'm saying.
It's very evocative. It doesn't have a lot of tension because there are no semitones, and any tone in that scale can be any tone you want. So music kind of lifted off from having one function per note, one function per degree. That's tonality. And now with Bartók, as I said, we kind of float away from it. And with Debussy, whom Bartók studied very, very religiously, and as we'll see later, it gets wacky.
Okay. I will do it only with my mobile, so the sound will be really clean. Know what it is. So what we heard, so that's the beginning of Shining, but it's also the beginning of the third movement of Bartók, of this piece of Bartók. And it's here. Ah, c'est la symétrie. So if you look at the xylophone part on this, it's what you hear. No, not here, but later.
Then
So there is 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, and then back. Which means that again, it's here. It's here. But when you listen to it, it's totally impossible to know that it's something that structure. I'm sure that when the next time you will see shining, it will be totally different. At least for me, it will change a lot because I didn't know until 2 days ago I discovered this by surprise. And I'm sure that next time I will see the movie, it will be a bit different. It's a joke, but it's not a joke. I mean, it's also because it means that the music, when we listen or when we look at something, we find it really beautiful. But what is also interesting, and the maps help a lot for that, is that we can understand the beauty of this. And we will see the conclusion that that's something very important for us as a player also to speak about this.
Yeah, because there is kind of a huge paradox between this use of symmetry, and God knows it's very important with Bartók, who structures entire works around what he calls an art form. And so there is, a paradox between this use of symmetry and the arrow of time. I mean, symmetry exists in space, but does it exist in time? Can you actually listen to a musical figure that you recognize as being the same, played backwards? What kind of figures and what kind of figures fit into that mold? And that's, well, first of all, Bach tried to find that. He made reverse canons, but it was just Sudoku for him. But for Bartók, it was a matter of survival of music and the survival of form within that strange world of one xylophone playing this, and only symmetry could have happened. And there are other composers, one of which I think we'll talk about very soon, who also dealt a lot with symmetry and kind of almost the spatial organization of the work. But just one last thing about Bartók. So we saw that the Fibonacci and the golden section rule a lot of the micro structure of the work, but it also regulates the relationship between works. So, for example, the fourth and the fifth string quartet by Bartók both of them are set in 5 movements. The first one and last one of each of them is a fast movement, fast and pretty substantial. And for Bartók number 4, you have 2 quick movements here and 1 slow movement. Whereas for Bartók 5, you have 2 slow movements and 1 quick movement in the middle. And so there is, first of all, the Fibonacci sequence in music can lead to a lot of pseudo-philosophical reflection. It's a bit of a trap. So it's difficult to manipulate these kind of tools. But there is a guy called Erno Lampai. It's on JSTOR. Who looked at the number of beats in each movement, not the number of bars, but but the number of impetus in meter, the number of impeti, I don't know, impetuses, and he saw that there was, for example, the first movement of Bartók 5 had that many 13 on 7 on 8 more beats than the first movement of Bartók 4. So it really ruled his entire imagination. It's kind of it's not wacky, because I mean, you look at it, and Bartók was conscious of it, because at the end of many of his works from that period in the 30s, he would write the timings the piece would take, down to the second. And when you look at the proportions, you get the same type of stuff. And these two string quartets, they're kind of twins. Of one is the evil twin of the other. It's very strange, but it's almost unsettling, to kind of realize that as well. This type of control. So because the proportions are so clearly cut and voluntary that you wonder if inside there is really music or just stuff to fill in a way.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So on this sheet that you gave us, we see the name non-divide.
Ah,
These
okay,
are the beats counted and these are the bars below. Is that correct? And here we see the real Fibonacci and here we see 88. Is this meaningless?
I think that's his own vision of when that section starts, and that's what Ligeti, parce que la ligne du bas c'est Ligeti, c'est okay, and yeah, because there differences of opinion about where a section really begins, and Lanvai shows.
This is Lanvai.
Yeah, it's the same. Yeah. I didn't.
We didn't speak about this.
No, but it's the first time we meet each other.
Why not to speak? Like a string quartet. That was for Marco, who is using a lot the Fibonacci bounded section. Okay. Now we will speak briefly because I would like also to speak about other composers, but briefly I will speak about the lyric suite from album Deck. If you don't know this piece, you listen to it. Incredible, really. So string quartet, written in 1926, I think. So the piece has many layers to you can understand it in many through different angles. And even when he wrote the piece and presented the piece, he didn't speak really about the real truth of this piece, which is a love affair, something secret. He had an affair with someone and was married, etc. So, and that's only after the death of his wife.
In
so
79.
76 or
76, so 40 years after his own death.
50 years after the premiere of the lyric suite, that someone discovered or was pushed to discover it from I don't know, to reveal exactly what was the problem, what was the topic of the piece, which is the love affair between Albanberg and so Anna Fuchs. And he decided that there were two numbers, two figures. One is 10, which is quite easy, and the other one is 23. So that's not related to Fibonacci at all. So 10 is the number of Anna, and 23 the one of Albanberg. So I just wrote something on the paper. I will read it easier, but he decided to help himself to write the piece with these two numbers. So the first movement is 69 bars long. You know what it means? 3 times 23. But then the tempo. So it's about the duration, this, but well, the number of bars. For the tempo, it's 100. Quaver is 100, which is a multiple of 10. The poco tranquillo, which is the second tempo, starts at bar 23. That's for the first movement. It's roughly what it is. You can find in details other things. On the second movement, the tempo primo is 100 again. The second tempo is half, but still a multiple of 10. The tempo 3 is 69, again, related to the 23, and it's 150 bars long. So not 51, 50, just always in it applies also for the third movement. There is a very, very famous passage with the col legno, extremely difficult, almost impossible to play. Well, actually, totally impossible to play at the tempo, which is 150 again. You succeed to play it at 138. You're
still
really happy, really happy. But then this section starts, of course, about 46 and about 69. Again, 23 bars off. And it's so on through the whole piece. It's the same in the fourth movement, in the fifth movement, etc. The tempo of the sixth movement is 69, etc. It's really a lot, all the time. But it's not about mathematics. It's just about numerology, finding through figures something that can help the composer to write the music and not to be alone. I think that for a composer, that's the main thing, being alone in front of blank sheet of
And also-
paper, and that's difficult.
And also Berg,
Am I
as
wrong?
opposed to Bartok, was a very romantic man and
Yeah.
social person. So even if it was completely private, and even if nobody knew about this kind of structuring, because it's not exactly structuring, let's be honest, he would still have expressed himself in a cryptic way, but still he would have expressed that. And we're compliant with this thinking, even though it kind of asks a question of, can you perceive?
Which means that until now we're speaking about duration, proportions, and then maybe there are other parameters we can put, and maybe Leo can speak about the spatialization or Xenakis.
Yeah.
Maybe you can introduce also Yanis Xenakis
Yes.
for some of them.
So Xenakis didn't start off as a composer. He started off as a communist revolutionary in Greece in the late 1940s. He was condemned to death by the word in 1947. So he fled to France, where he met Olivier Messiaen. And Xenakis had some kind of formal training in music and was kind of going down the Bartok path of fiddling with folk music and writing, rhythmical stuff based around folk music. And he also had a formation as an architect, as an engineer of buildings and matter and things like that. And Messiaen told him, well, I'm not going to teach you anything. Messiaen was the great composition teacher of the 20th century in France for more than 50 years. And Messiaen told him, okay, I'm not going to teach you anything because you're at such a strange position that I wouldn't dare to move one of the pieces in your game, in your relationship to the world. And so as a resistance participant in Greece, well, he lost an eye, and he also participated in a lot of mass movements and manifestations, and it kind of sparkled an idea in him that material in music, as is in buildings, is about density. And Xenakis' music is deeply unforgiving, because when you look at a score by Xenakis, it's like looking at a block of concrete that you have to eat with a spoon. No, but so Bartok and Berg made big demands on the performer. Xenakis does not care about the performer. No, I'm not kidding. For him, the performer is just, it's just an interface. He's just a tool that, and he has to do something to achieve a task of describing some kind of physical event. With Xenakis, music becomes physical and music becomes spatial as well. I was talking about the spectrum of an instrument. Xenakis breaks this down completely. So, for example, you have a normal tone. So the optimum sounding spot of where to put the bow is about 1/8 of the vibrating chord, of the vibrating string. With Xenakis, he wants to break the sound barrier in a way. He wants to find things within the instrument that can replicate a form of violence. A form of violence which he felt was real within architecture. He was a student of Le Corbusier, so that's the brutalist movement. And he also had lived through violent things. And so he did not refrain from using and showing that violence through music and through an ideal of joining, alliage calls it. Alliage is the alchemical term of, you know, joining two metals together. And he wanted to do that with music and math. He had a complete utopia, which for every work he would find a new formula for. So he would take inspiration from fluid mechanics, well, more than inspiration, actual phenomena and developments from fluid mechanics, topology, and really a very wide array of works. And one of his big innovations, even though it really existed before, is what we call the glissando. So, what note did I play? I played a lot of them, about an infinity, I hope. But that was also the main basis for Xenakis, to show a form of fluidity. But there is something strange about Xenakis as well. He was an incredibly thorough and idealistic man, but he was also very amateur in a way. So just as a quick anecdote, I think it was in the 1980s, he wrote a piece called Tirapse for double bass. So all of his pieces are either called after Greek words in Homer or Greek words. And so nigh impossible music on the double bass. And so the person who would premiere the piece knocked at his door one day and said, I'm sorry, Yanis, I don't think you know what a double bass is, because you can clearly think of the double bass as something that can play this. And so, but Xenakis was like, oh, but look. And so he had a cardboard cutout with the lines drawn in and said, no, but it's possible. And of course, he didn't take into account what we call finger pressure. So you have to apply a sort of force. And, but this side of the performance, as interesting as it may be, also has some sort of a chaotic effect on the performance. So if we don't have a speaker, it's fine. But in 1970, he wrote a piece called Mika. Mika meaning, well, with two Ks, so it's kind of weird, but it kind of means small. And what he was doing is that he observed the Brownian motion of I forgot which one here, for 14 milliseconds, then stretched it out, put it on music paper, and added some dynamics. It's a piece for solo violin. And so, you know, so we talked about tempo markings. So tempo markings, it's quarter note equals 132. Or, Xenakis, that's something different. It's half note above 60. So, sorry, that's an ad. no possible pattern, no possible point of vantage on the music. Also, as a listener, you know, you also have this violence because I mean, he writes pretty loud music, but he explores the spectre also in a spatial way. Because being an architect, he also realized the deep effects something can have on the space itself. And for that, he created the polytope. So the polytope are a series of 4 or 5 more or less finished projects of combining architecture, lights, festivals, and sound installation. So there was one in Cluny, in the center of Paris. There was another one in Montreal, and there was another one in Persepolis, in the north of Ireland.
And he wanted to do it for the world as well.
He wanted to make
He
it.
didn't find it.
But this weird piece of music, I'll admit, kind of asks a question of when you try to formalize music as he did. His breakthrough theoretical book about music and math is called Formalized Music. And if you're interested, it's really, really fascinating. His coin of vantage is unmatched, I think. He's the only one who has that kind of vision of things. This constant research of models, especially on the beginning of modern mathematics, you know, irrational, that kind of begs the question of how, okay, let's give up about the music, but how do you know when, how does the composer know when a piece is finished? Because, I mean, he took 14 milliseconds of it. It could have taken 15. Because, you know, it's about Brownian movement. It's not sonata form. There is no necessity for it to end. And so that it's a very ethical question in a way, because, I mean, music happens in time. So it can't be as, in a way, abstract or, you know, out of time as some principles of thinking might be.
Which is, I will speak also about mathematics and music nowadays, especially during the last 20, 30 years. But what Leo spoke about with Xenakis is really important. It's also that putting just
A program, a formula,
a program,
and letting it roll.
Call it into music and strictly that, which is the only example from Xenakis known as far, really well known. He's the only composer who wanted really to do this. All of the other composers, it's what we wanted also to speak about. These other composers that they held themselves with something, Fibonacci, with figures, etc. But Xenakis, because he was originally a mathematician, an architect, he has no real knowledge about music and no knowledge at all about how to play an instrument, and didn't care at all about this, really didn't care. But also because the goal of his music was to organize mass, which is something new in a way. I mean, you can get big orchestras, like in Wagner or Bruckner Symphony, Mahler Symphony,
But you have musical material.
you have musical material. In this case, it's not at all this. It's just
What you hear is
he's trying to organize it, and because he knows how to organize it, which was not the case of the other composers before. They didn't know. They didn't have the knowledge in mathematics or whatever to organize this. And that's a huge difference. And so it's a really fascinating example for us. But which means, as a player, there is 4 quartets, and one of them, the first one, ST4, is just a formula. So it means that the 2 first pages, I mean, it takes 20 seconds to play them, 2 minutes to read them, and at the end, I mean, it's just impossible to play them. It's just impossible. What is on the paper, at the tempo written, is something out of the range, totally out of the range. But okay, we can react saying, okay, well, it's not saying I don't want to play this. Okay, that's your choice. It's not mine, and not because I respect it, but or because I'm crazy or I'm interested in particular music, but just because I think that there is something beyond just the reality of the players to understand, which is what the composer wants to express through his own world, his own words, and to create his own world. And when the composer is saying, okay, well, what I want is just to organize the mass, all of the people around, it's all of this, and I just want to know how to describe this number of people on paper and then on stage, then I have to translate this, which means probably to be quite wet on stage immediately because it's too difficult, but also to accept it, not to be, well, not to have shame because I'm not playing all of the pitches and the reason. It's not about this. The purpose of the music is not this. And that's one way also for us to understand how the composer is writing the music, and through different parameters, in this case, mathematics. So that's it for Xenakis. Maybe I will speak about the, sorry.
The only thing I wanted to say is that we have essentially 15 minutes left for if you want to do Q&A or something.
Okay.
So decide if you want to.
Just 2 minutes about something, and maybe next time, because we will be back in October, we will speak about Albert Mosselas for sure, but maybe there will be a short introduction about also what is called open music and all of the mathematics nowadays with music. So we spoke about this last time a little bit. Nowadays, because also there is this institute in Paris named IRCAM, Institute of Research and Coordination of Acoustic and Music, invented and created by Pierre Boulez. So there are a lot of people researching about music, and they are doing with the computer, with the help of computers, a lot to understand the sound, but not only the sound, also to structure the time, and also to, well, many things about electronic music. So we will speak about this in October. I promise that we will have help until that from people from the account, just to be able to speak about this, because I'm not able at the moment, but that's the main thing. They are trying to filter the sound, and so sometimes you have to go to the account just to play few sounds and just then they record it, and just to understand what is the timbre, the pressure, etc., of the left hand, of the right hand, right. It's really complex and also extremely interesting for us to know that it exists. I don't know if it helps a lot the composers, my own opinion on this, but at least it exists. And so there is this open music, which is modelization about music. I don't know if you use it, but it helps roughly the composer to not waste time in calculation, but just put something, you add something, you link them, and then you obtain something, a result. Well, several results, and then you can choose into this. So if you want, I don't know, pitches, and then this kind of rhythm, and then a filter about the sound, just to get only certain harmonics depending of the rhythm you have. Then you put all of this, you rely them on the computer. It's quite easy to do it, even I could do it. Then you can get some result, and then you choose the result. For the composer, of course, I think it's yeah, it's important. I don't know if it helps to write good music, but that's another problem. We'll speak about this later. So the conclusion for us, and before the Q&A, is that, of course, there is a difference between mathematics and music. I mean, it's not, it's what Leo was speaking about at the beginning. You know, there is this problem with the octave. That's exactly the same for everything. If you put, that's what Xenakis proved in a way with this non-playable music sometimes, is that if you just put something totally, just the essence of the mathematics into the paper with music, I'm not sure it works totally. And all of the composers, even Bartók, if you look at the score, the first movement of the music for piano, percussion, and celesta, it's not 89, it's 88 bars. So
music has
there is
other
an
necessities.
at the beginning, so you can say that there is almost 89, but it's not exactly that, because he has to write, well, he has to translate the formula into music, which is not the same than just
Copy and paste.
Yeah, copy and paste, and that's a huge difference, a huge difference for us, because we are on stage, we are players, and we know that for ages. For example, Beethoven was writing at the end of his life some tempo marks on pieces he already wrote a long time before, just because his publisher invented the metronome. So they decided to make money with the metronome. And so they asked the composer to put tempo marks. But sometimes just there, if you do this,
Impossible.
it's not music. I mean, it's too far too quick, far too fast. So you have to, at the opposite, just to take the tempo you,
Which sounds,
which sounds, and that's it. So it means that mathematics and music are really related. It helps one and each other are related for many reasons, but for the composition, it helps much more than it is really related for us as a player. So maybe that's the I'll show you that one. So if you have some questions, I don't know if you want to.
So we have 10 minutes or so budgeted now for a kind of Q&A. At 5 o'clock, there's sort of going to be a reception in the barn.
Okay.
And so, of course, you should please take the opportunity to ask some questions then in a more informal setting. But for now, maybe if there's some questions. You know what? I'm going to start by asking a question. I'm going to. So, which is the following. This is something that I'm very curious about, which is supposing a composer, a contemporary composer, maybe you're even in contact with that composer and have a conversation with them. They compose a piece of music, and there are a lot of very interesting ideas that go into the composition, things that are very important to the composer, the way they think about it, their ideas about structure and form and so on. But then you have the music. The composer doesn't get out on stage and perform. I mean, maybe they do, but what goes through your mind? What is it important for you to think the same thoughts as the composer while you're playing, or do you think completely different thoughts?
It's what I tried to demonstrate with Shining. I mean, I didn't know. I knew that it was Bartók, but I didn't think about Fibonacci. So it's the reason why I'm saying that probably I will watch the movie and play back to Paris. Try. I hope that I will see it differently. Not because I'm more intelligent, not at all. It's not about this. I'm not more intelligent. It's just because I know something about this. But does it help? Not really. So look at the movie, and I don't know to play it. It means that sometimes we have to know. The knowledge is always the most important thing. People like this, right? So that's really important to know. But does it help? Really, it depends. Sometimes it helps because we know that there is the mirror. It's going here and then it's going down. Okay, well, up, down. We understand this, and we know that above 55 we have this, and etc. But knowing that it's bar 55 doesn't help really. I mean, when you are playing the lyric suite, knowing that bar 23 there is something. Okay, well, it's important to know it, but after a while, it doesn't mean something. It's just we know that it's important, and then you transform it. You know that it's a point, but psychologically, yeah, it's something else. But it's important to know it. But the formula and all of this, I was saying that we are not mathematicians, and it means that we are not able to understand everything, of course, and also it means that that's not the purpose of us. There is a but there is also Ligeti was speaking about this in an article in the 80s, I think. He's saying that for him, he's really impressed by mathematics and music, the relation, and how the computers are helping now more and more in the 80s to write music. But saying that I'm not sure that a brain is less than a computer. And saying maybe in the future it will be different. So 35 years later, computer improved a lot. I don't know for people if they improved a lot. I'm not sure sometimes, but I mean it's not matter of that. It's matter of the difference between a machine or formula and someone who is able to react and not program, not something that just following his own route, his own path. And that's really important. And Ligeti is saying that in music, for him, the most important is not the way it is built, even though it's really important for the composer. What is important is the final object. If you want to express beauty, putting beauty into the piece through whatever you find, I mean, the nature, the mathematics, whatever, something else, or if you want to express something else, to put it inside that. He's thinking that how it is built is what is in the kitchen, and not to put it on the stage. And it's true. And it applies also for us as a player, not to say, okay, well, here that's bar 23. Look at me, and that's very important. That's the figure of Anna. It doesn't mean something.
It doesn't bring anything to interpretation.
For every in the interpretation. But for us, it's important maybe to know this, to understand. And you will see that with the Posadas, with the Liturgia Fractal. It's a huge cycle of 5 string quartet, 53 minutes long. It's incredible. So he's using the fractals. But I don't know really how he's using them. And it doesn't matter really. I mean, it's his own work and nothing else at all. So in this case, it's not really important.
I think Danny just asked my question, so I have a follow-up. So it seems to me that your answer indicates that it's very hard to intuitively get the meaning of the structure in, say, temporary music. If intuition is not reliable here, then what is the justification of a good and bad structure?
Good and bad structure.
Yeah. Playability.
Sorry.
The ability to be played. Of course, that's part of
No.
That doesn't matter.
No, that's not about that. In the two examples I took for example, Bartok is using Fibonacci, which is something not at all related to the research. That's two figures, just two figures, 10 and 23. But there is nothing, well, else than the law of something. It's just it should have been it would have been also 11 and 24. It was exactly the same for him because it was just the figures related to the people. So there is that's not at all the same. But at the end, what he's able to do is incredible as a result. And it's through your ears that you will be able, and the emotion you get when you listen to music, that you will be able to understand that if it's a good or bad structure. And I mean that it's at the end, and it's what Ligeti is speaking about. At the end, what is important is to be on stage and to put a result on stage, and the result doesn't mean the formula, and it means the piece. And if the piece is not done through a formula, or whatever, it doesn't matter at all. And sometimes with some pieces, we don't know exactly, we don't think about this. The Große Fuge, for example, the final movement of the 13th quartet of Beethoven, I don't know what is the formula. I know that it's just crazy. I know that it works. I know that it's exactly not, it's something that is not to do for any composer. I mean, it's so crazy that it should be forbidden in a way, the class, but he did it. And it works.
I don't think one can speak objectively about music. It depends on space, it depends on your ears. And even when just looking at the music, I mean, look at the graph. They disagree on where a certain section starts. You know, that's part 21 for Van Vij, and that's part 20 for Ligeti. I wouldn't divide between good and bad. They're original and derivative structures. They're structures like the Große Fuge, which there's nothing like it. So, yeah, I mean, you know, it was booed when it was premiered, and we don't call them. Yeah, but yeah, I maybe I'm being too romantic about this, but yeah, I mean, you know, a piece needs to have a beginning and an end. So for me, that's what holds it automatically holds together in a way.
There is no secret formula to get beauty or to get the proper result.
I think what I'm asking is, how do you justify
It's through the story. For example, yeah, okay, I understand your question. For example, for the Lyric Suite, through the story, through the fact that so many players decided to play the piece, and all of the audience convinced by the piece, again, even if it's a very difficult piece. I mean, not only to play it, but also to listen to it. It's difficult. It's not an easy music, but it works. Really, it works. And yeah, there is something a bit magical for the questions.
Yeah, I guess I was wondering, because you were speaking about an earlier question, how structure sort of be difficult to like innately hear.
Yeah.
I was wondering if I guess this is also more open-ended questions, not answered. But I was wondering if in sorts of music where it's more, I guess, easy to hear the structure, like in like modern contemporary minimalist music, like I guess Terry Riley or John Adams, for instance, if you can hear these sort of, I don't know, something like Fibonacci sequence, or is there mathematical structure in that kind of music, which is more?
No, it's based on patterns, like tiles. Yeah, but I mean, for music, I mean, with Xenakis, the structure equates to what you listen to, and vice versa. So, because I mean, he wrote with musical concrete. I'm barely exaggerating. So there is such a work on density that there. I mean, there are other composers, of course, like Ligeti is also like this. Even though he plays with the art of musical illusion, the micropolyphony, but that's just for a way to get a certain kind of fluid density.
I hope everyone has a
I
lot more
see there is
questions.
another question, last question.
Just like a no.
Sorry.
Just go back to
Go
the
back.
go back to the role. I mean, I'm asking the same. We're all asking the same question in a way. Back to the role of the performer. I mean, you were talking about how, of course, composers it's a sort of structural device of this constraint.
Yeah.
But I would certainly say that if you're playing a Bach fugue, as a performer, you would have to know. Not just invert, of course, you have to know this is the theme.
Yeah.
Like all of this is sort of, and of course you have the benefit that the audience is more familiar with it as well. But
I mean, a fugue it's one of the more intricately and constrained musical forms because you need to find a counter theme that lines up well with the theme.
but my point is like we were comparing this, and of course it's essential that the performer knows
Yes.
what's going on. Yeah.
It's also to maybe to express it differently. You have to know how it is done, how it is built, but also you have to digest it as a player. And I mean, you have to know that that's the first entry, the second, etc. But then also you have to digest it and to put it into music, and not only into
Information.
and just to show that 23, 10, that's 55. That's the end of that's bar 89. No, it doesn't. It's important for you, for the player to know it, to understand the structure, and probably when I'm speaking about the structure, it's not to say, well, that's the first part of the first movement, and then the second part, and blah blah blah. Okay, it's not about that. It's also about the proportions and how it is related to organize the time. But then it means to digest all of the informations you get. You can learn looking at informations of the pieces you are playing, which means that okay, well, that's the first entry, the second, blah blah blah. But at the end, it's just like for the shining extract, it's just an accelerometer, through Fibonacci. It could be through something else, just because it was just obsessed by this. That's it. And so, if you are a percussion player, maybe it's important to know that. I mean, it's not bad to know it, but at the end, it's just to do what is on the paper. It's different ways to understand something. And it applies for many other things. I mean, if you are going to play Schubert, which is not related to mathematics at all, as far as we know nowadays, because, I mean, you have to know about his life, you have to know about his obsessions, about the harmony, about the evolution of the harmony through his short life, and all of this. And you have, if you play, for example, Thyssen Maiden, which is the 14th quartet, one of the really famous one. Well, you know that the theme is from a leader, so you have to listen to the leader. You have to know the words, but also you have to understand that it's not the same tempo at all.
It's not the same music because one has
That's
words
not the
and
same
the other
music.
one's just a melody. So
It just, but it helps to know all of this, to know that it's as a player. You have to, and it applies for everything. I mean, if it's related to mathematics or to words or whatever, it helps just to know that. And that's something you have to be on stage to understand this, to be on stage with your instrument, to understand that at the end, what is important is to get the emotion for the people in front of you, nothing else. Not to say, okay, you know, I'm intelligent. No, at all. At all. At all.
only because the food is sort of. But please let me encourage you to pester these musicians and ask them the questions that you have.